Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida's College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students and for students. I'm Calista Kahadaran, a junior studying journalism, and our guest today is Mr. Phil Stambaugh, whose career included working with the Atlanta Hawks, the Metro Conference, the Olympic Games, and the PGA Tour. And now he's an adjunct professor in sports management at Flagler College. Hi, Phil. Thank you so much for being here today.
Calista, thanks for having me as a guest.
Awesome. My first question would be, what sparked your passion for sports? What inspired your interest in athletics?
I think from an early age, I was lucky because both my parents were into sports. My dad was a swimmer in high school. My mom majored in physical education here at the University of Florida. And so I think they had me in sports by about age 8, and then I would play different sports based on the season. I slowly realized I was good but not athletic enough to compete at high levels. So then I had to figure out what was I going to do to stay in sports. And I played tennis in high school and then matriculated to golf as I got older, even though I did play golf when I was younger. But that's really how I got into sports. And then it was a question of how do I stay in sports?
You're a graduate of the University of Florida's College of Journalism and Communications, and you have a degree in public relations, so, go Gators.
Right.
You also earned your master's in sports administration from Ohio University. How did these experiences prepare you for a career, with major sports organizations, and what were some of the most important skills gained in college?
I think at the time I went to the University of Florida, there were very few sport management grad programs out there. Ohio University was one of about 4 or 5 and the best program in the country for a grad situation. So when I graduated from the University of Florida, I had 2 years working in the athletic department, which I thought was important, but I didn't think I had enough experience to go sending resumes everywhere and get a job in sports. Highly competitive, tough field to get into. It's a lot easier now because there's a lot more opportunities in different areas. I think I learned mainly when I was here writing skills first and foremost. You have to be somewhat of a writer to be in journalism at some degree, even with the age of Twitter. You've got to be a writer. I think the real thing though that you learn, and I can't stress this enough, is be a listener. You learn how to meet deadlines when you're in school. But being a listener and improving listening skills is the one thing I think I took away from 4 years. I had great professors here. I worked with people and went to school with people that went on to do other great things in sports.
After college, you worked in marketing and communications department for the Atlanta Hawks. So, what did that role entail? And at the time, was it surreal being involved in, with an NBA team?
I got to the Atlanta Hawks through my graduate program at Ohio U. Each student was required to do an internship, and my internship happened to be in Atlanta for the Hawks. So I wasn't all that far from Gainesville, which was a nice thing. And I started actually selling season tickets in the summer as part of my internship experience. And then the whole time I was there, it eventually morphed into a job as an assistant in the communications department. Is it surreal? I wouldn't call it surreal. I remember the first practice I ever went to with the team, I had to get used to players not missing shots in shoot-arounds. I mean, I'm saying, these are professional players. One year we went 42-40. We came off a playoff run the previous season. The professional game is different than college athletics. There's no question about that. It's a lot different now in the NBA than it was when I worked there for 2 years. So I think, is it surreal? No, you just know that they're just sort of like you. They used to asked me for $10, and I'm thinking, these guys are making a lot of money, and they're
Yeah.
asking me, an intern, for a starving kid in the communications business for money. It was sort of funny.
And so you then worked as an assistant director of communications for the Metro Conference. What kind of communication content did you coordinate for that league office?
Well, I got to the Metro Conference by virtue of working in the NBA. My boss was a guy named Craig Thompson, who, when he hired me, he had moved to Atlanta after being the PR guy for the Kansas City Kings, which is now the Sacramento Kings. And Craig knew of me in the league. He was looking for an assistant. I was available. I was already in Atlanta, and Craig hired me. Craig just recently announced his retirement as the commissioner of the Mountain West Conference. And he was the commissioner of the Mountain West for about 20 years. I learned a lot from Craig working for him in my short time with the Metro Conference, but working for a conference office was great. You didn't have the highs and lows of working for an individual team or school. All you cared about was make sure you coordinated the people in the league, the 8 teams we had, and the communications people with each school, make sure they got their work to me in the central office, which was in Atlanta.
In 1984, you were a media liaison for the Summer Olympic Games. What led to this opportunity, and what did you do in this capacity?
I was very fortunate when I worked at the University of Florida. One of the sports information directors was a guy named Randy Hart, and he had left Florida and gotten a job as the communications director for USA Swimming. And he called me on the phone and asked me, I need help. We've got the Olympics in Los Angeles. I'm trying to staff swimming and diving venue, and I thought of you and wondered if you'd be interested in doing it. And I said, absolutely. And everything was paid for. All I had to do was be there. It was quite an experience, made special by the fact that swimming and diving had a lot of Gators at that time on the U.S. team. So that was pretty neat. But I was the liaison actually for ABC TV. And I was responsible for coordinating the interviews, whether that's getting somebody who had won a gold medal. I had to meet them at 5 o'clock at the Olympic Village at a certain gate so they could be on Good Morning America, or just the thrill of winning. Once they got out of the pool, I was literally the first person to meet them and take them over to the interviewer, which was a lady named, Olympic swimmer named Diana Nyad. She once swam the English Channel, I believe. They wanted them completely out of the pool. They didn't want them toweled off or anything. They wanted them wet. They wanted the feeling of them just winning. And so it was really neat to be there. But swimming and diving at the '84 Olympics, I think it still holds true in every Olympics. You either have swimming or diving events every day of the 2 weeks of the Olympics, except for the opening ceremonies day. So I was always busy.
You then moved to Jacksonville and worked as a stockbroker for a number of years. What spurred this shift to the financial industry, and did your background help with this transition?
I think what really helped me was that my dad was already a stockbroker, and he suggested it. He said, we're going to open an office in Jacksonville, Florida, Phil. I know you're liking sports and like what you do, but I think this may be something you ought to try. So he suggested that. I had no real ties to stay in Atlanta at that time, and so I moved to Jacksonville, where I already knew some people from Florida that were there, and it eventually helped me get my job at the PGA Tour in an indirect way.
Wow, that's amazing how things kind of just always come together.
I think being a communications major really helps in the financial services industry because people are entrusting you with their money, and if you communicate properly to them, it makes things a lot easier, I think.
Yes, I agree. Being in Jacksonville, you were surrounded by so many golf courses. So how did you get your start with the PGA Tour?
Well, again, it's the Florida Alumni Network. A fellow who worked at the PGA Tour knew of me from undergrad, and he knew I was in Jacksonville, and he thought of me because he knew I had an extensive sports background. And he says, we've got an opening. He called one day, said, we've got an opening that I think you'd be really good at if you'd be interested in coming out and talking to us. And I'm not sure they actually, in those days, ever interviewed another person. They offered me the job. I said, I can start in 2 weeks. And I was off and running for 26 years.
That is amazing.
But it was the Florida Alumni Network that really helped.
Yes, that's amazing. And so as a media official for the PGA Tour, how did you help promote and publicize the golfers and tournaments?
Well, most of my role over 26 years was on the Champions Tour, which is the players over 50. I did work the occasional PGA Tour event with the young guys, but we had the guys over 50, the legends of the game, quote unquote. And so golf is a niche sport. And when you're talking about the Champions Tour, you're carving a smaller niche among a niche. So I had to be creative in trying to get my players some exposure in a tough environment, because some of the cities we went to are big metro areas, and you're competing for the sports dollar in so many areas, and it only goes so far. So I had to be creative and really come up with some good pitches.
Yes. You've interviewed many golfers over your 26 years with the PGA Tour, such as Fred Couples, who was ranked #1 in the world in 2013. Do you keep in touch with any of those athletes by chance?
You know, I really don't. I keep mainly in touch with people I used to work with at the tour. I see 4 or 5 of those people quite a bit. I'm still involved in golf, amateur golf in Jacksonville, through the Jacksonville Golf Organization. But I don't really talk to the players much. I might send them a text. I've got all their numbers still. Might send them a text after they win or something, and they'll get back to me, say, thanks, Phil, appreciate it. But no, I don't bug them. I've had 26 years out there. I don't need to keep calling them and whatnot.
And plus, you've worked so closely with those that you do keep in touch with. I understand you've built that connection, that friendship.
Yeah.
So what were some of the biggest, or your biggest challenges, rather?
Everybody's battling for exposure. All communications professionals. And when you get in some areas where you've got NBA, you've got NHL, you've got NFL, you've got 2 major colleges in there, it's pretty hard once we roll into town for a week at a golf tournament to still battle for your little quote unquote pound of flesh. I was fortunate because on the Champions Tour we had big name players. We had Arnold Palmer still. We had Jack Nicklaus, Lee Trevino, Tom Watson. So my 26 years, the balance of that, I had star power, and I was able to do anything.
After leaving the PGA Tour, you became the Director of Communications for Secret Golf. What is this organization, and what did you oversee in that position?
Timing was sort of right for Secret Golf. I was near the end of when I wanted to quit at the PGA Tour, and one of our players, pretty 2-time major champion winner, Steve Elkington, from Australia, came to me and he said, Phil, I'm winding down my career and I'm starting a company called Secret Golf, which was a subscription-based company where he had a group of 12 to 15 tour players, LPGA, PGA champions, that he had under contract to film instructional content, and then they sold that as a subscription to anybody. And so my job was to launch his company, get it up and going, explain to people what Secret Golf is. So I did that for about 2 years for Steve, and then I bowed out. He had it up and going. He didn't need me anymore.
You're an accomplished writer, publishing on PGAtour.com, PGA.com, GolfChurch.com, in Time Magazine, and in Golf Week. When you look back, which of the stories give you the most pride?
You know, I really think, I mentioned the Champions Tour had star power, but I always liked finding that player that had a great story to tell and writing about him and getting his story told. I used to tell first-year players, I'd do a little seminar and talk to them before the season started, and I always said, fall in love with your story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. All of you came from different ways to get on this tour to play golf at a high level. Don't be afraid to tell people things about your career that would be interesting for them to write about. so that once you shoot 64, 65, and I'm interviewing you as a first round leader, you'll be all able to tell what you're all about as a person. So I carried that over to writing, and I used to do features on players for things, and it was always the guys that did get a lot of notoriety that had a story to tell that I got the most out of.
That's great, and that kind of ties back into what you said earlier about being a listener overall.
Correct. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yes.
About being a listener.
In 2019, after serving as a guest lecturer, you became an adjunct professor at Flagler College in St. Augustine. What do you enjoy about teaching sports management, and do you miss life on the road with the PGA Tour?
Well, the opportunity at Flagler was sort of interesting. I found out that a former collegiate athletic director had retired in St. Augustine, and I ended up going to lunch with him, and he said, "Phil, I think you'd be a good teacher." He said, "I'm sort of winding down my career, and I don't want to really teach anymore. I think you'd be good filling in my shoes. Let me introduce you to the head of the department." And I had never thought about teaching before. So he introduced me to the head of the department. He said, "Well, why don't you try guest lecturing first?" So I did that for 2 semesters, and then he left Flagler to go start a sport management program at Guilford College up in North Carolina. And the new person that came in, I had to reintroduce myself to her, but she said, "We're going to have an opening here as an adjunct, and I thought you'd be pretty good based on the feedback I've gotten." So I had never taught before, and it was a tough first year because you're preparing, you're doing a lot of work. But after 3 years, I've sort of got my syllabus and my lesson plans down, and it's easy. But the impetus for getting into teaching, I think, was sort of my ability after 30 years in the business to give back and teach these kids. And Flagler's 2,600 students. It's a small private liberal arts school in St. Augustine with a really good athletic program. We've got kids from all over there, and it just is very fulfilling to see some of my students go on and succeed in sports, and some in other countries. It's really neat.
Well, they've had an amazing teacher. So, what advice would you share with those who want to break into the sports entertainment field?
Well, I think there's no substitute for getting experience early. I waited till I was about to start my junior year here at Florida before I started working in the athletic department, and I worked really 2 years. So the early experience really helps. Sports is a thing you've got to have a lot of passion for. You've got to have some level of writing ability, or you're just not going to make it. But the early experience is the main thing that you got to build on that. I worked a tournament with this kid named Adam Blau from the University of Iowa, and Adam said he started in the athletic department when he was a freshman. And I thought, wow, I was 2 years behind the 8 ball starting as a junior at Florida. You're doing the right thing. So I always stress that to kids when I talk to them. I said, get as much as experience as you can. And it is invaluable. It builds relationships. But you've got to have the passion to do it in sports. It's a little bit of a different animal.
Being that you're so experienced in the sports industry and you've seen how media has grown so rapidly over the years, are there any trends that you've noticed that have changed and have drastically shifted since your time being in?
No question about that, Callista. For instance, my textbook at Flagler, I teach out of a textbook, very little. I try not to use it, but we have to cover over 15 weeks. We have to cover some basic things of an intro to sport communications class. And it's constantly being updated. Even from the last time I taught to now, things are changing. Things move so fast now in the news cycle. A lot of it's because of a phone that we carry now. People covering the Gators are tweeting as the game is going on. When I worked in the business, we never had that. It was, you got done with the game, you got quotes from the coach, maybe the leading player, and you go back and write your story. And now the need for speed is the ultimate thing.
And do you see this as like an advantage or a disadvantage for people that are just now entering into the world of sports communication?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the quicker you can get things out and still have them be accurate, because I still think accuracy counts for a lot. It used to be you needed to be accurate before you were first. Now it seems a lot of people put stuff out that they want to be first rather than being accurate, which I don't think gives our business a very good name. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet and on Twitter. And I think to maintain your integrity as a journalist, you've got to be accurate and then be first in that order.
So I personally come from a family that loves sports, specifically basketball. And even though I don't watch televised basketball, I have gone to a few games with my brother. But how different is the game of basketball now compared to when you were interning with the Atlanta Hawks?
Well, I think the game is different in that the three-point line has changed the way the game is played. Yes. There are bigger guys that can shoot three-pointers just like a free throw now. I mean, and it's crazy to watch a game now and think back to when I worked at the league and the game was more centers were back to the basket. Mm-hmm. There were bigger centers. You fed the ball inside. Mm-hmm. It was a more physical game. Mm-hmm. The game that's played now is much more like a European style game where you have big guys that can really shoot. Every game in the NBA now is a show. We didn't have all the glitz and glamour, the pyrotechnics going off. We had less advertising on the court and on the boards around the court. It's just the marketing people took over and it's changed the whole concept. I think it's changed it for the better, but it's definitely different than when I was there.
Yes, as my father says, no one attacks the basket anymore.
That's right.
So in that role, what was the level of adaptability you had to have or the transitions you had to go through?
One of the fun things and not so fun things about my job is when I was in the field on the road, no 2 days were the same. As much as I tried to make them the same, I could only plan for so much. And I'll give you an example. I was in Indianapolis. It was Saturday night before, and we're finishing, our final round's going to be Sunday. And the news breaks that Bobby Knight is getting fired. Well, I knew the next day all the media that were covering my golf tournament were going to be in Bloomington for the press conference. Couldn't do a thing about it. And, we finished the tournament, but I didn't have many bodies in that room covering the final round when the putt went in. It was just a different experience. Same thing. I was in Seattle, Washington. I had a legendary coach named Don James. Same thing. It's Saturday. Don James is getting fired the next day. And right there in Seattle, and I just knew, and I had media almost apologizing to me, like, Phil, we're not going to be here tomorrow. We're sorry. And I completely understood. But I saw tragic things happen. I saw a player die. I had an official die one year when I went to Japan. And that's stuff that you can't plan on. So every day was different. And there were good things that happened when I say every day is different as well. Different things would happen, or I'd find out about, a player celebrating some milestone in his career. So there were good and bad, but no 2 days were the same.
So looking back over your career, did you accomplish everything that you set out to do, or, did you make the impact that you wanted to make?
I think so. I certainly got to travel a lot, and I would have never done that had I not worked for the PGA Tour. I figured out that I went to every airport in every major city in the U.S. over the course of 26 years.
That's amazing.
I don't know if I should be patted on the back for that, but certainly it gave me the opportunity to see how our country has a variety of cultures. The Northeast is totally different than the Southwest or the Pacific Northwest. And to experience that time, because when you're at a tournament, you're in a city for a week. I used to think, I don't know how anybody in my business works in baseball, because you're 162 games, 81 of them at home, you're 2 days here, then you're gone to another city, then you're back home. I didn't know how they did it. Now, when I worked in the NBA, I don't know how the players did it, because they're playing 82 games, 41 of them at home, and you could always tell, just the travel would get to me, much less the physicality of playing the game and going up and down the court. But you could always tell in the NBA when you got two teams that had played the night before that were traveling home. You could always tell, because they would be tired, and you would see it on the court. A lot more fouls called. That to me is something that I'll never forget, is just how do these guys do it?
So after spending so many years, I guess, getting insight on, golf or just sports in general, are you at a point now where you can actually watch sports without maybe critiquing it or actually enjoying it?
I think I probably do enjoy it, but it's hard for somebody that's been in the business 30 years plus not to think of all the things going on behind the scenes. And I still have quite a few people that work in the industry, so I'll hear little tidbits there. They'll tell me things. So I sort of keep tabs on things and I laugh at it, but I do enjoy my sports.
So that's amazing. You are an adjunct professor right now, and aside from inside of the classroom, is there anything that you do outside of the classroom?
Yeah, I think over the time I've sort of helped mentor 4 or 5 men and women in the business, and it's been very fulfilling to see where their careers have gone. I've tried to give them some of the things that I told you on our show today, and it's very neat to see their careers and where they are.
Thank you so much for your insight. In the short time that I've gotten to speak with you, I know that, you mentioned how so many people just reached out to you and offered you these opportunities, so that shows that you have that passion.
Well, thank you. It was great being a guest, Calista. Thank you.
Thank you to our viewers for joining us, and until next time, good night.